Welcome back to 20 Minutes of Clarity. I'm your host, Jason Noble, and with me today is Andy, the man merchant. This is your go to podcast for financial information so you can make better informed financial decisions. As we continue on our series here in January, we're going to be discussing what money management strategies can help you navigate inflation. What an important topic as we were coming off of inflationary rates that we haven't really seen in a very, very long time here in our country, Andy. Um, but this is a good thing to get really ahead of as we go into 2025. And I believe we have, again, the top three things that we're going to be addressing today. If you don't mind, can you give us that
Yeah.
rundown, what that looks like?
Yeah. So what we're really hoping to cut out today, Jason, is going to be step one is go into details about how to review and negotiate your expenses. And I'm really excited. I think that's going to be a fun topic to cover. The second one is strategies and ways to consider about adjusting your cash management accounts and emergency savings and other assets because things cost more. And then the final topic we're going to wrap it up with is just the overall reviewing your spending. You're going to share a really exciting rule called the 50-30-20. So make sure you stay tuned for that. But then also we'll kind of land with some, considerations within your investments. A lot of people are asking, do I stay in the market, get out of the market? So these are the things we're going to cover today. And so it's going to be a good, fun kick off the year. Let's start with wealth management and inflation, all really big words everybody likes talking about.
Yes. Well, this was a couple years ago in 2022. I reached out by ARP to comment on an article discussing inflation. What should retirees focus on as they may be on a fixed budget, and how do they navigate higher costs of just going to the pump or going to the grocery store, things of that nature. What I said then applies directly to this conversation, which is focus on your needs or wants. Now, what I put in that article was essential and discretionary expenses. As you could imagine, your essential is your needs, your discretionary is your wants. Now, we're evaluating that. It just ensures that you're looking at, okay, what are your housing costs? My mortgage is an essential expense. However, getting new carpet on a second floor, I'm going to say that's a discretionary. My wife may say that's essential. So in our household, that means it's essential. Okay, Andy? What I'm getting at is we're looking at those things, right? Okay, we take a look at how much you're spending on groceries. Now, you may have anomalies like, I don't know, November and December because a lot of people coming over your house and things of that nature, right? So factor that in. But did you see your grocery bill increasing over the course of 2024? If so, factor that in for 2025, right? What does that look like? Another thing on the discretionary side, this was an interesting story. I like to bring stories to our conversation. I had this couple back in 2022. Um, they were spending around $4,200 a month on eating out. Eating out. Now, they're foodies. They love the Charleston food scene. And I get it. We got some great restaurants, absolutely. But that's quite a bit. And I was sharing with them, like, if you continue that trend, right, that's wonderful, but you're going to have to work longer. If you wanted to cut that down, maybe you could retire on your timeline. And other than that, I just told them to watch their sodium intake and make sure they tip well. But but they looked at that as an essential expense.
Yep.
Now, I say this because when I share this with my clients, it riles them up. So it's an extreme example. I got to give this a couple a lot of credit. They actually looked at it and they go, okay, we don't have to eat out this often. We kind of just enjoyed retirement early, like going into retirement too much. Why don't we do this? Why don't we set ourselves up a budget for $250 a weekend? Now that was them coming to that conclusion. They went from 4,200. Their goal was 1,000. They didn't hit their goal, Andy. Okay, in case you were wondering, they came in at 2,000, but they still cut that discretionary expense by $2,200 a month because they made an active choice. Was it easy for them up front? Absolutely not. However, they stuck to it. And now when I meet with them and we're looking over their finances and we looked at their cash flow and their discretionary spending, I still see it around $2,000 on a monthly basis. And I ask them how it's going now, and they go, "Well, we just look for deals. So
Yeah.
we still go out and do things. We just look for deals, or maybe we don't get that appetizer, and maybe we don't get that dessert that we don't even eat anyway, right? Like they're just being more conscious of how they're spending. And also, this is a side benefit for this particular couple. Between the two of them, they lost over 30 pounds. Like that's pretty cool, right?
Just by not
Um,
eating out in the Charleston foodie space. Okay,
yeah,
good to
I
know.
think it's just because they when you're eating out, yeah, there's places out there that do focus on healthy foods, and I get it. I just don't go to those places personally, Andy. But that's not to say it be critical of anyone who does go there. But like I go out to eat, like okay, the barbecue joint around our house here, their wings are amazing. However, they're loaded with sugar and brown sugar, right?
Mm.
And like I can feel it the next day. It's like, oh, right.
Yeah.
So I gotta watch how many wings I eat when I go to that barbecue joint.
Yep.
But anyway, let's
Yep.
talk about the other part though, negotiating contracts. This is
Yep.
where we want you to look for opportunities to renegotiate your subscriptions, insurance premiums, or service contracts at a fixed or reduced cost. I gotta say, we did this with AT&T. I don't know if I get in trouble for saying their name, but our internet provider, their costs went up. We looked at it and we're like, you know what? We shopped it around. We found that we could go to a different place, save us a good amount of money, $30 a month. We call that a good amount of money in my family, right? And Rachel, my wife, called and she got it to what that comparable price was.
Yeah.
I shared that with my neighbor because I was like asking my neighbor, like, what do you guys pay? Do you have the same service provider, things of that nature? And I shared that with my neighbor, and he was paying $20 more than what we were paying. So if he makes the phone call, I don't know. I haven't followed up with them, but it'll be interesting to see. Do they save money? I bet you they would by making the call. The answer is always no until you ask the question. Same thing with if
Yep.
you have carry on credit card debt, right? Call them up and like lower my rate or I'm shot. I'm going somewhere else. They got those teaser rates. Build that into your analysis. And subscriptions. I can't tell you how many times we're doing meetings and we're just doing a cash flow analysis. And I'm like, hey, how often do you watch this or this streaming service? And like, we were watching the show, but then the show's done. That's not coming back. I don't know, maybe next season. But they're not even looking at it anymore, but they're still paying, 10 or $15 a month for something they're not even using. See, that's low hanging fruit that could be done. But I do think it's so important to put an E or a D next to your expenses. And then when you look at your essential expenses and its fixed costs, there might be something more you could do there. Andy, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts to reviewing and
Yeah.
prioritizing those expenses?
I mean, I think the message and the takeaway before we transition to the next one is just pay attention to it. If things cost you more to live and your lifestyle expenses have gone up due to inflation, then the only thing you can do is review your expenses and review what's out there. The tips around putting essentials out there, those are things you know what, if you make that phone call and they're not willing to budge, you're still going to keep it, right? You can't change it. You can't change your mortgage. Very likely you're not going to want to, but putting those things down there, looking at it, and then finding, okay, what of my essential expenses can I negotiate? And if I can't negotiate them, then I got to make a decision. It's funny as we transition, I have to share this one because I love that we picked an inflation topic. So we've talked in past podcasts about my son, Pierce. He's 13 years old. I call him my mini me. So for those that are out there that are looking for a longevity plan and their financial advisor, come here because I've already got my plan. He's 13, but he walked out of his room the other day because he's a gamer. He plays in the games, and he's like, "Dad, this inflation's killing me." Because in my household, if it's an essential expense in your mind, or if it's an expense, we make you think about it. And so he needs to buy certain whatever he buys in order to make his games work, right? I don't even go to the detail. And he goes, "It's crazy. Last year when I bought this, it was whatever the price." He goes, "This year, it's this much more. This inflation, Dad, is just out of control." So I'm like, dude, the kid gets it. He understood it. And I said, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" He goes, "Well, I got to have it." So he understood this was an essential expense for him. And he had to go say, "Well, I got to go find other ways to offset it." And so that's what he did. So my continuation, because I know we're running long on this particular thing around the first step out there, when you're sitting there going, "Man, it's a little tighter at the grocery store. my expenses are going up, my home insurance is higher, and I don't have a lot of control. Sit there and take a step back, review your expenses, see what are wasted expenses, see what are required expenses, and then start making decisions. And I think the best thing that Jason you said there was you got to go out and negotiate. Negotiating may be negotiating with your spouse, your child, right? Hey, no longer are we going to have Netflix, kiddos, because we got to still do this. What I tell people, what I don't want you to do is don't change your long-term savings. Try to keep that the same. If you're saving, for a retirement account, that's going to be there tomorrow. That's going to be there to solve and save you through inflation. Don't change that. Don't change your tithing goals if you're out there. Try to keep your core savings and what matters to you intact, and change all the other ancillary stuff. Because to me, saving tithing is not negotiable.
Well, here's an adjustment that could be made is on your cash management account. Andy, can you speak
Yep.
to that?
I think right now that what people feel comfortable, it's always cash is king. Might be sooner or later Bitcoin is king. I don't know where we're headed yet with all that, but cash management accounts are the more general term out there. But increase your cash management account. Put more money into cash. It doesn't always have to go into long-term investments, but start building that. For some that are out there, you might need to have an extra month of emergency funds. A lot of times, right, Jason, you and I we'll set a goal of our clients to have between 4 and 6 months worth of their expenses just in a cash account. It doesn't really matter what interest rate you're getting on that port, because the point of it needs to be there in the event you need it. Because what's the other side of inflation is when we have high inflation, companies get tighter, jobs could become more at risk. So make sure you've got enough cash savings for emergency funds, or for the other spectrum is it could just be having enough cash in there in case of liquidity event comes up. Maybe you've got a high end credit card that's coming due, or maybe you've got a note due from a business. But having liquidity, because things are going to cost more to operate, are going to be important. So increase your cash management. I think is important as well.
You're
And not to
adjusting
mention
that
the
for the
yield.
rising costs of inflation, right? And you're still looking at that 3 to 6 months. Then that's the rule of thumb. That's the general rule, 3 to 6 months. Um, Now, if you work in a very volatile environment where your income could fluctuate rather significantly, maybe you go to the 9 or 12 months, right? But those are like one-offs, and this is where you want to speak with a professional around that part of it.
Well, and
And I
and right,
think you
Jason.
touched on this, Andy, and correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not going to waste everyone's time if you already addressed this. How do you how do you go about getting like the best bang for your buck on this cash management account, going
Yeah,
after those high yield savings accounts to really
that
counteract that inflation,
that
right?
might be negotiating with the banks, right? Going back to point one is negotiate. Here's the thing, though, and this is the message. The point of this podcast is to give you clear insight of what you can do to improve your situation, bring more clarity. Banks aren't going to call you and say, "Hey, Jason, just want to let you know, thanks for being such a good loyal customer of mine for all these years. We've been paying you 0.01% on your savings account for the last forever. Our current rates of new clients are higher. They're not going to automatically move you up, right? So usually you need to look at your cash. I tell this to clients all the time. You should be getting between 3.5 and 4.5% right now in a savings type of account or high yield savings account inside of your bank. If not, you got to call us because we have those options. But here's what you might have to do. You might have to go and go to another bank and move some assets over. You might need to find that minimum and move 25,000, 50,000 over to Bank B, because Bank B will give you 4.5%, right? You might go back to your current bank and say, "Hey, I'm sorry, guys. I appreciate it. I love everything you've done. I'm going to keep you as my primary operating bank, my money in, money out bank. But that savings account that you're not paying me anything on, if you can't move the number up, I got to move it," right? Because 4.5% or 4% is way better than 0.01%. And if
Yeah.
inflation's running hot, I mean, I can do that math, right? So you've got to be intentional with your cash management and make sure
Well,
you're
and
not just having it build for 0.1% interest.
one of the things that I see with these higher rates, they're like teasers, Andy, right? And they're like, okay, if you have this much money or above, we'll give you this 4% only on that amount. We'll give you that 0.5% on below that amount. So it's just reading through the paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
Like, look at the fine print on these banks, because I'm seeing this more and more, especially with the Federal Reserve that was raising rates for this longest time, and now they're starting to lower the rates. But looking at or is it the first penny to the last dollar going to get that better rate? And if so, really interesting to take a closer look. If not, buyer beware. Just be aware of what you're getting
Yep.
into.
Yep.
The last part of this whole conversation, right, is about what money management strategies can help me navigate inflation. It's tracking that spending closely. It's using those cash flow tools and apps to monitor expenses and identify areas where inflation has been the most significant impact. It's something that we talked about earlier, but now it's about utilizing and implementing these tools and resources, these apps. And, you may think that we're just here trying to put you on apps. That's not the case. It's if you have an Excel spreadsheet. By the way, and you can imagine we have quite a bit of a large Boeing presence here, Andy, and I have quite a few clients that came as engineers from Boeing. And I remember this one meeting. It was an Excel spreadsheet, the best I've ever seen in my entire life. All this data was put in there. It was absolutely incredible, and there was numbers back from 1998. Like this report has been going on for
For a while.
over 2 decades. Okay, right? I mean, I shouldn't say two, but a long time. Anyway, as we were going through it, it was interesting to see like how much he was paying on mortgage interest and things of that nature. And then as we refied and moved and like all those different things that were coming in, and there was a clear delineation of what groups of his spending patterns were having higher inflation rates than others. Most people aren't doing that though, right? So if you're not doing that, taking the data on a monthly basis and putting it into a spreadsheet of some sort and tracking it like this engineer did, it's leveraging apps, saving time, saving that energy where it's done for you. And you just have to monitor and maintain it, right? Was the point of that.
Mm-hmm.
One last thing, it was interesting on this, Andy. When he put in his retirement planning, he didn't factor in inflation into any of his spending
Hmm.
at all.
Well,
Like,
we know inflation's a for sure deal.
yeah, well, we're talking about it right now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So it was just like one of those funny things. It's like you tracked it since 1998, but yet, and you're spending in retirement, this thing doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
No, it's
Crazy.
going to be a clear and present danger. I
Yeah.
really like this approach. It's the 50/30/20 rule. On the 50 goes towards your needs. When you're spending your money, 50% of what you spend goes towards your needs. 30% goes towards your wants, and 20% goes on saving or debt reduction, right? Now, if you have a lot of debt, maybe you're not spending 30% on your wants, okay? But it gives you a guideline, okay? Now, on the 50% for your needs, make sure that's adjusted for inflation naturally, right? Hence the topic of this conversation. On the 30% towards wants, you may need to temporarily make reductions on that, depending on what's going on within your top of the line cash flow. If you only have X amount of money coming in and you're spending Y, right? If you're looking at the Y, where can you reduce? Well, you're probably not going to be able to reduce your needs. You're going to have to reduce the wants. But we really want to make sure that 20% stays pretty solid, right? So you got the 50 towards your needs, you got the 20 towards your savings or debt reduction. It's that 30% going towards your wants that's could be moved around. All right. And so it's not just that. Let me add one extra element to this, Andy. If you're taking a look at your spending and you have 60, 70% of your spending going towards your needs, okay, did you buy a vehicle that you didn't need? And you're making payments that are dropping that higher.
Mm-hmm.
Did you buy too much home? Did you not put enough down? Like, there's something going on in that segment of your spending that needs to be seriously addressed. Okay, this is not to be critical. This is just to go, well, ah, we are not building a tribe of victims on this podcast. Well, I got 70% of my expenses or on my needs. There's nothing I could do, Andy and Jason. No, we're not hearing that, right? I know I'm just talking to Andy now, right? But like I know there's someone out there going, I'm beyond that 50% on needs, and there's nothing. No, there is. Continue listening, learning, taking notes, right? Getting educated out there, seeing what you could do. Maybe listen back to the beginning where you can negotiate some contracts. There's things that you can still do, okay? And really about, is that truly a need or is that maybe a want? That's for you to decide. Andy, what are your thoughts on the track and spending closely? Anything you want to add there?
It kind of goes back to what you said, review and negotiate, and as we wrap up on that, I think this is a good rule to follow by for those that are maybe looking for more direction and guidance is use this tool, right? Use the 50-30-20, and it may just be write down, take that notebook that we encourage you to have, write down needs, wants, and savings and debt, and just start filling in where each bucket fits. Does it meet the 50-30-20 rule? And if it not, then that opens up questions like, hey, what can I do better? Right. And I do want to plug that, if you go to clearpicturefinancial.com, we have a ton of resources of white papers and past podcasts, even from last year, that are still relevant today. So if you are struggling in those categories and you need some help, check out that site first, download those white papers. And if you need that accountability partner to be, someone beyond just your friend network or your spouse supporter, that's when you come into our group and we can help you, because this is so important. We start this. We're going a little long today because we believe that saving is in cash flow and optimizing your cash flow is the absolute starting point to be able to have a more clear outlook on your wealth planning, and it's really opens the path and the doors for all the other topics that we're going to talk about for the rest of the year. So I think it's a good topic. I hope that helps everybody kind of start with their spending, and we hope to talk to you if anything comes up in the future.
Well, thank you for listening to 20 Minutes of Clarity. I'm your host, Jason Noble, and that was Andy, the Man Merchant. Stay tuned as we continue this conversation around setting the foundation for the new year. Thank you and have a great day.